we will stay with this story and speak to Gareth Dennis. He's a railway engineer and writer. He is also a member of one of the unions that John just mentioned, actually, the TSSA, although he's not part of a group that is on strike today. Hello there. Thanks for being with us. I mean, I don't know how privy you are to some of these negotiations, if at all, but is your sense that the two sides are still very, very far apart?
Yeah, there's a pretty massive gap between what's being offered at the moment, particularly to the RMT, who represent sort of signallers, track maintenance workers, sort of blue-collar workers across Network Rail and some of the train operating companies. Yeah, there's a big gap still, and it's worth kind of understanding kind of what that gap really represents. It's a reminder that, particularly kind of related to staff numbers, compulsory redundancy, so that's telling someone they no longer have a job, has still not been taken off the table. So I can understand why, in terms of negotiating, that's still until that's off the table, it's very difficult to move forwards.
Right, so that particular issue, they won't give a guarantee that there won't be any compulsory redundancies, and your understanding is that that is a major sticking point, and that, therefore, if that's the case, though, that becomes a who blinks first situation.
Yeah, I mean, Grant Shapps and the government are referring a lot to this. They're using this word modernisation. Now, it's a very clever word they've chosen because it paints the unions as if they're kind of standing in the way of progress, but that really is not the case. We've heard a lot about new technology being rolled out to do things like inspecting track, and these are things that have existed for decades. The last series of strikes occurred during an event called Rail Live, which is a bit like the Farnborough Air Show, but for railways, where you have huge amounts of technology showing kind of different inspection methods and ways that we kind of look after the rail infrastructure in the modern era. There are lots of people with RMT tabards there because the unions are in no way oppose actual modernisation with that sort of technology. So modernisation is really being used as a bit of a euphemism for just reducing headcount, which is not on, frankly.
And but when Grant Shapps says some unions won't allow the same team to clean different railway stations, even when those railway stations are very close to each other geographically, I mean, is he just not right on that, or are there some areas where actually the unions could give some ground?
So there are a couple of things at play there. Firstly, it's government. Network Rail is really a part of government. It's important to understand the different makeup here. Government controls all these levers of power. It's not just a soundbite that Mick Lynch has invented. It is because government literally owns Network Rail. Network Rail is a government body, and the train operating companies, certainly since COVID, but even beforehand, were actually controlled pretty much entirely by government in the kind of the levers of the contracts they run under. So government actually sets those regional boundaries in the first place. But there are, don't get me wrong, the railway is a complicated and fragmented industry. There are lots of strange little rules that sort of sit about, and certainly, when it comes to things like cleaning, there's potentially space. But in other circumstances, I've heard Grant Shapps and the DFT referring to outdated working practices where one person can't do multiple jobs. A reminder, you can't have a track engineer maintain signalling. You can't have a signalling engineer maintaining overhead line equipment. Their skills are learned skills. These things don't appear out of thin air. So there is the workforce is a skilled one in the railways, and we have our specific things that we can do because those are our experiences. Those are things we've learned. But I think that the overriding challenge is that those interesting little things that perhaps are worth having a longer discussion on, you can't get to that discussion until you've taken off the table that you're going to tell someone they don't have a job anymore. So I think until that happens,
so what on earth is the public meant to do with that then? So the public just has to put up with not being able to move around the country ad infinitum?
Well, no, I think it's key to understand, we hear lots of stories of people who've been really disrupted by the strikes, which is frustrating. People who work in the industry don't want to see that happen. But government has cut lots of services anyway. So the government itself has actually resulted in a lot of the disruption that we're seeing at the moment by the fact that lots of the train operating companies are not operating a full timetable yet, despite how full trains are. We are back to 95 to 100% of ridership on the network. So any discussion of reduced ridership doesn't apply anymore.
It's up in leisure travel, but it's down in commuter travel. So the times have shifted. The income, therefore, has shifted because the train operating companies aren't getting those big fat season ticket payments, and that inevitably leads to a change, doesn't it? That's no one's fault. That is just what COVID has dramatically changed everything.
Well, actually, it's not COVID really that's done that. That's a trend that's been pretty well understood for 10, 15, even 20 years. COVID really just accelerated that by 5 years. So actually, the changes we've seen from COVID are not radical new things that none of us knew about. Those are changes that have really been bedding in for a long time. More flexible working, people working in more flexible ways, which means they're not commuting. It's not the bowler hat and the umbrella hooked over the arm at 9 a.m. in the morning. So that change has been long in the works, and government has sort of not grasped the nettle, and COVID has sort of forced its hand on that one. But actually, a lot of the commuting services into London are still on a reduced service. So it's difficult to exactly judge where that change is because of this reduction in timetable that's still occurred. Some of the train operating companies running a 50% timetable in places. So it makes it quite difficult to really get a handle on it. Long term, though, there are still, we've got 100% of people moving around by car. Climate change means we need to expand rail capacity, and that means we need more skilled people, not fewer skilled people on the railway.
OK, Gareth Dennis, for now, thank you very much for your time tonight. Thank you, Gareth Dennis, who is a railway engineer and a member of the TSSA union as well. And we'll keep you up to date with that. And we will inevitably be talking about rail strikes again.